Imagine yourself suddenly set down, surrounded by all your gear, alone on a tropical beach close to a native village, while the launch or dinghy which has brought you sails away out of sight. Since you take up your abode in the compound of some neighboring white man, trader, or missionary, you have nothing to do but start at once on your ethnographic work. Ethnography is an approach to social research which can overlap into other labels such as qualitative inquiry, fieldwork, interpretive method, case study, and even autoethnography. This presentation will focus on the origins of ethnography, data collection methods, key concepts, evaluating ethnography, and ethics. The origins of ethnography, which took place in the 19th century, can be seen as a contemporary term to ethnology. Ethnology was the historical and comparable study of non-Western societies and their culture, prepared by travelers and missionaries, which anthropologists used as the core of their anthropological work. In the early 20th century, anthropologists began to do their own fieldwork, which included both observation of the society and its culture, and the theoretical and comparative interpretation of the information they gathered. Anthropologists documented non-Western societies' way of life by living amongst tribes for up to a period of a year. The latter half of the 20th century saw a shift from non-Western societies to studies within Western societies. The studies included both rural and urban areas. This community study movement began a shift from the study of anthropology to areas which included sociology, psychology, and human geography. Ethnography can be considered a mixed methods research style, but it is characterized primarily by qualitative data collection methods. Observation, interviews, and documentary materials are all ways through which the ethnographer collects data. Ethnography is not defined by how data is collected, but by the lens through which data is interpreted. Ethnography makes use of both non-participant and participant observation. In non-participant observation, the researcher observes participants from afar. Participant observation is the process enabling researchers to learn about the activities of the people under study in a natural setting through observing and participating. Individual and group interviews are often conducted after observations. Researchers often use open-ended interviews to verify whether their experiences are accurately reflected by the researcher's descriptions. Interviews are often unstructured. Good open-ended questions sound like conversations. Photographs, diaries, class essays, and audiovisual aids are also used to help the researcher understand and report more about the group they are studying. The researcher chooses amongst these texts and adapts them to the purposes of his or her analysis. Triangulation can reduce biases and increase reliability of the conclusions made by ethnographers. Humans are complex and their lives are ever-changing. The more methods we use to study them, the better our chances to gain some understanding of how they construct their lives and the stories they tell us about them. Time, reflexivity, methodological ignorance, and thick description are all key characteristics of ethnography. By spending time in the field, ethnographers are able to minimize the Hawthorne effect, notice change and continuity, develop rapport, and allow the strange to become familiar and the familiar to become strange. Traditional ethnography has been criticized for situating ethnographers as the authoritative and objective record keepers of culture. Contemporary ethnography employs reflexivity to combat these criticisms. Reflexivity recognizes knowledge as socially constructed. It demands ethnographers think and report critically about the context of their research. To learn from participants' worlds or cultural systems, ethnographers need to develop methodological ignorance. They must approach their fieldwork as if they were ignorant children experiencing the reality of participants' worlds for the first time. The ethnographer's socialization into that experience allows them to develop an understanding of the participants' perspectives. Thick description is in-depth illustration that explicates culturally situated meanings. Observations can have any number of meanings. In order to be able to communicate the specificity of meaning, ethnographers need to be able to show and not tell. Showing contributes to the credibility of ethnographic research by allowing readers to come to their own conclusions about the data. When evaluating ethnography, 8 steps must be considered. 1. Question. Does a clear and concise research problem define the aims of the study? 2. Sampling. Do samples across different time periods and places contribute to a possible hypothesis? 3. Access. Is the hypothesis altered and negotiated to better fit the previous sampling? 4. Fieldwork. Is fieldwork data collected, compared, and contrasted with the previous sampling? 5. Analysis. Do the links made between the hypothesis and the data correspond? 6. Evidence. Is the evidence examined to determine success? 7. Theory testing. Is the refined hypothesis put into action to test? 8. Conclusions. Are errors reported to increase reliability? Education ethnographers face the question of ethics in at least 2 general domains: an academic institutional domain and the domain of interaction with their participants. The academic institutional domain is monitored largely through accountability to the internal review board, with somewhat indirect monitoring through the peer review process. Ethnographers face hurdles when dealing with the rigid ethical expectations outlined by the internal review board when they are dealing in the domain of interactions with their participants. They place themselves in the practical domain of everyday life, where one's ethical actions are forged when they are in the field, where behaving ethically can be complex and dynamic. The Internal Review Board has a human subject review committee to consider risks involved in research and helps researchers consider their work from an ethical perspective. Protection of dignity, respect for autonomy, children's vulnerability, and their often limited ability to make decisions are some of the many dynamic and unique issues considered. Ethnography is the study of culture, or the common knowledge communities of people use to interpret experience and guide behavior. To understand participants' perspectives, ethnographers attempt to walk in participants' shoes. Thick description, methodological ignorance, reflexivity, and triangulation are used to avoid bias and improve validity and reliability. Ethics are paramount.